Put God first.
Your presence in their lives gives them validation.
Our children don't need us to be superheroes.
If you do these things, the next generation and the generations that follow will live in a world far better than the one we have today.
Men, stand up, be fathers.
Welcome to the Inspired Legacy Podcast, Season 1, Episode 17. Hey everybody, I'm Mark Henderson, your host and founder of the Inspired Legacy. Our mission is to celebrate fatherhood, equip men to lead boldly, love unconditionally, and leave a lasting legacy. And when we talk about legacy, I know we've been talking about legacy a lot the last few episodes, but hey, it's what this podcast is all about. And when we talk about legacy, we want to make sure that as men, when we pass on someday, that we are leaving behind a generation of children who become adults who are capable of, working and supporting their own families and taking care of things in terms of, bills and mortgages and just being able to go to work every day and fulfill that obligation of adulthood. And I see so many, I hate to use the word millennials just because I feel like they get beat down constantly, but I'll go ahead and say millennials that, have a bad rap of maybe not having the greatest work ethic, historically speaking. And so I wanted to bring on a good friend of mine who I can't think of a person better qualified to talk about work than my good friend, Matt Wagner. He is one of the hardest working dudes I've known. He is a business owner and a family man, and he knows a thing or two about getting work done and rolling up your sleeves and just getting after it. And so I want to welcome Matt Wagner to the show. Buddy, how are you?
I'm doing well, Mark. Thank you. How are you?
Very well.
Good.
Appreciate your time tonight. I know you got a ton of things going on, and it's a work night for you, and I'm sure you got other things to do, but
no, not at all. This is definitely worth the while. I appreciate what you do. I listen to you often, and I wouldn't have missed it.
I appreciate that, man. But yeah, I want to talk about work. So, but before we dive into that, kind of tell the audience a little bit about yourself. I mentioned you're a business owner, a family man, but kind of dive into that. What do you got going on at home?
Sure. So, I own a concrete construction company, and I've been in the concrete industry now for a little over 20 years. My wife, Carrie, and I live on the farm that I grew up on. We got 3 kids, Hudson, Hayes, and Hope, 19 going on 20, and 2 17-year-olds. So obviously getting into a different part of our lives as far as their ages. In a couple of years, we won't have anybody at home, which we've already been starting to talk about, which is kind of odd, but it's the natural progression of things. Yep. So that's kind of who I am. I grew up on this farm, like I had mentioned, and I think that's probably where my work ethic started, kind of to get into what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, because I know we've been up to your place several times over the years, and always gracious hosts. But yeah, there's always, like at any farm, there's always something that needs to be done, and always, and you've either have just come in the house from doing something, or shortly after we leave, you're on your way out to finish up, and that's just kind of the life of a farmer. And I think that your kids have grown up and seen that and have embraced a lot of that, and I think we'll get into that here in a little bit. But this is a concept that, honestly, if I am just really honest with myself, I don't think I fully embraced work and what the Bible has to say about work until I was an adult, sadly. And that's not a knock on my parents, because they did everything that they should have done to introduce me to work. And I did have some responsibilities growing up, and I did my fair share of work, but I always viewed work, and this is probably common for a lot of kids, but I viewed work as punishment. And right. Like I said, I was an adult before I really understood the concept that we're put on this earth to work. Work is why we're here. Exactly. And so whatever we do, we need to do it for the Lord. And I think it just underscores the importance. I keep cutting you off. Sorry.
No, that's all right.
for me, again, survey of one underscores the importance of finding work that aligns with your natural giftings. Because I think that when you work in the areas of your God-given talents, work doesn't feel like work,
Absolutely.
And it's possible to get up in the morning and feel good and feel excited about the tasks at hand or whatever you have to do that day. And some achieve that, but many do not. I think maybe most do not. So it's important to have that solid work ethic that you can lean on when the days get long or boring, or maybe they don't fulfill you. So you've got to have that inner drive and will to do a good job, even when you don't want to. And that's kind of what I want to unpack with you, Matt, because not to say that you don't want to do the work that you're doing, but I've seen the way that your boys, especially, and maybe your daughter, Hope, but your boys have just really latched on to the idea of, again, just rolling up your sleeves and getting after it and getting work done.
Yep.
And I'm sure they do their fair share of complaining behind the scenes, but just from the outside looking in, it just looks like you've raised some boys who have really embraced the concept of work. And I just kind of wanted to have you unpack that and maybe lift the hood and give us some of your tips and secrets. What's the secret, man?
Well, what's the secret? It's a really interesting question, Mark, and I'm really glad that you asked me to take and be on tonight, take and unpack that a little bit and talk about it, because I have done a lot of I guess you'd say soul searching, and especially when you have children and what's been instilled in you by your parents, and how well it served you through the years. That's one thing that I've always looked at, that I said, how did they do it, number one, and how do I take and pass that on, and how do I do it as well as they did? And so I think to start, and maybe this would have been a part of a good introduction, but this fits right in well here, is looking back on it after I listened to what you just said. The first thing that comes to my mind is the fact that, number one, my mom and dad instilled that in me. And living on a farm, I think, definitely has a contribution to how you perceive work, because you're right, there is always something to do on a farm. It never ends. And especially the type of farm that we grew up on, we had livestock, they had to be fed every day. So although Sunday was a day of rest, there were still chores to do, and we still needed to take and get those done. And so even when you really want to not do a whole lot of anything, there has to be some type of motivation there to take and get out there and get done what you need to do. So looking back on it, as I was growing up, it really didn't seem like it was work, because it was a way of life.
Yeah.
And that's just the way that we perceived it. This was our life. This is what we did. And there were things that needed to get done. So I think that's probably the first part of it for me, looking back, is that's how it was instilled and implemented and taught by my parents, was this is what we have to do.
So do you think it's safe to say that you can't start your kids too young in terms of responsibility?
Absolutely not. I don't think there's an early enough age. Obviously there's an age where they're going to understand it better, but when I remember vividly when my kids were, still in diapers, when we had fence to make, when we had to go out and do something, whatever the case may be, they were right there with us. It needed to get done. We had to go do it, and they were there. So I think by example, they saw that the same way that I saw it, and I remember vividly looking at my children, going, I remember this as a child. I remember doing the same thing that I'm doing with you right now, being in your shoes. And that kind of almost brings it full circle, but it instills this sense of pride, if you will, for me at least, to be able to take and go, this is something that I'm passing on. This is something that I learned, and this is something that I can teach you as well. And I know that it served me well.
Yeah, I think when you, like you said, when you've got work to be done, and it's just you make it a family affair, like you said. It just becomes a way of life, and you don't know any better. So I think that's a good starter right there.
I think it is. The other thing that comes to my mind is that both my parents they weren't afraid of work by any means, but I in my mind, and this is the way that I still think about it today, and it's what I try to take and tell all three of my kids, is that work is what you make it. Work, sometimes people look at it with a negative connotation, going back to what you said, where there are people that will go to work and they know they have to work every day for 40 years, and they count down the days until they can retire, and that day that clock hits and boom, they're done, and they're like, that's it, now I put my time in. And if a person chooses to look at work that way, or a task, and I like to look at it that way, where it's more of a task. It's Everybody has it, and if you define work as work and you go there 8 hours a day and then you come home and it's not work anymore, I don't believe that to be true. I think that you can look at it both ways. You can look at work starts in the morning and it ends at night, or you can look at it and say, I just have these things that I have to do, and it starts in the morning and it ends when I go to bed, whether it's the laundry, whether it's the dishes, whether it's pouring concrete, whether it's whatever it is for whoever what we're talking about and what they do for a living. But if you break that down, and the way that I look at it, and the way that I've tried to teach my kids, is if you break that down to just the task that you have at hand, and say, all right, the quicker I get it done and the better I do it, I don't have to go back to it, and then I don't have to worry about that anymore. And I find a sense of accomplishment in that task. And when you find the accomplishment and you take pride in what you do, then really in my mind, it transforms that task, or if you choose to look at it as work, into something more than just the work. It's something that you can take pride in, and it shows some success and satisfaction. And I've always been built in the way that I like to work with my hands. I like to see something that's tangible, and I think that could be applied to anyone's job. And you can look back on what you do and say, all right, I can feel that. I know what that feels like, and it feels good to me. And if I can teach that to my kids, to take pride in what they do, in every task that they do, and when you're done with it, be able to take and say, see, that I accomplished that. It changes what the I guess that stereotypical way of looking at work is.
Yeah, that is a big one, I think. And I feel like that is one that we struggle with in our house, is finding, because we're not on a farm, as you know, and so we have to be a little bit more creative when it comes to finding opportunities for our son Holt to to have a regular set of chores, if you will.
Yep.
But the key is to come up with those chores that really push him and stretch his limits physically, so that he can, at the end of the day, look at what he's done and feel that sense of accomplishment. And I feel that if you are, I don't know, if you're doing smaller, more mundane tasks, it is maybe a little bit harder to achieve that. Maybe I don't know if that's true or not, but that's, in my case, it has been that way. When every time I finish a physically challenging job, and one that just really pushed me to the limit, but at the end of the day, I get it done, and I can sit back and I can enjoy a cold beer and feel really good about the job that I did, and look at it like, yeah, I did that, man.
Yep. In fact, I would probably say, to your point, it is more difficult for any of us to look at those mundane everyday tasks and try to apply that same sense of initiative and motivation to those things, as it is those once in a while type of really big, whether it be something physical that you have to do out in your yard, whether it has that one big project that you got at the office. Those things always seem to take and focus an individual to take and handle those types of situations a little bit differently than, yeah, I got to go throw that load of laundry in. I know I got to go throw that load of laundry in. I know I need to go out there and I need to mow the lawn, or whatever the case may be. But if I think it's true in just about everything that we do, and this is the way that I try to apply it, is that if I can do all the small things well, I know that I'll be able to take and do the big things well. And so that's the way that when it comes to teaching my children, I look at it and I say, yeah, this is a small thing, but every small thing that you do is important when it comes to the point in time in your life that you got something big to do, because then it's not going to really feel as big as what it may be, because you just take it in bite-sized pieces and you just nibble away at it and you just knock it out, because you have that sense of repetition maybe, or just being able to take and remember all the little things that you did and say, yep, I'm just going to keep doing it little by little.
Mm-hmm.
And before I know it, I'm going to knock it out and it's going to be done when it's something big.
Yeah. Do you feel like your kids have ongoing chores that maybe fall into that mundane category?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just asked my son to take and do the dishes tonight, and I had to ask him 3 times to do them. So I don't think, well, and for that matter, every day when I go to work and I sit down and I have to do billing, or I have to take and go through paperwork, it's one of the things that I despise the most out of my job. And so I have to constantly remind myself, I have to do this. I have to do this. I need to get it done. I know it needs to get done. And I need to remind myself of those things. But I think for me, that's where, when I look at how I perceive it and what do I do to get around it, how can I take and relate the way that I feel myself into a teachable moment with my kids, to be able to take and say, you're doing the dishes right now, and I know you don't like doing the dishes. Today I had to do this, and I felt the same way. It's being able to relate with what you're asking them to do and saying this never changes.
Mm-hmm.
The words of my dad come back to me time after time after time, which is that there's going to be things in this life that you're not going to want to do, and you're going to have to do them anyway.
Yeah.
And he told me that so many times. I'm sure when I was probably a teenager and was probably digging my heels in a little bit when he asked me to do something.
Yeah. Your dad was a wise man. I find myself giving my son similar advice, more so around his attitude. Bud, you're always going to have things and people, for that matter, that you don't want to be around, or jobs that you don't want to do.
Yep.
And your attitude will dictate how well you handle that stuff. It's really up to you.
It really will. I've been a manager and I've been an owner for several years, where you have to deal with a lot of different personalities, and not everyone is going to look at things the way that you choose to look at things. And that's okay, because I think that's what makes it interesting, and that's where we can draw the specific traits of people that are really powerful in one way that I'm weak in, and allow them to flourish. And I think that's a good thing. But at the same time, I've always looked at it and I've said to myself, um, there's a big difference between attitude and behavior. And when I try to teach my kids something, I'll never be able to take and control their attitude on how they choose to take and perform a task that I've assigned them. But if they perform it well, that's the behavior of how they choose to do it. And so, for instance, if I ask them to do the dishes, or go outside and mow the lawn, or go set some fence posts, or whatever the case may be, if if they're if they go out and they do it the way that it needs to be done, and I look at it and I say, you did a great job, and I really appreciate the way that you did that, and point out the positive of what they've done, that's their behavior. If I go out there and I can tell because of their attitude, their behavior reflected their attitude, and they kind of did it as good as they thought they needed to do it in order to get by. And I call them on that, and I look at it and I say, that needs to get redone. I appreciate your effort, and you've been out here a long time, and I know it's hard work, but that isn't quite as good as it could be. That's not as good as what we need it to be. Those dishes are still dirty. You missed the lawn over here, whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
That's the behavior side of it that I know I can't control, especially as teenagers. Their attitude is probably not more times than not going to match the way that I would like to see them approach a situation, but it directly affects their behavior, and their behavior I can control. And through that, when they get done, it might not be immediately after the task is completed. It might be a day or two later when they finally kind of decompress a little bit. I can go back and I can then that teachable moment is there to say, do you understand why the expectation for you to take and do it this way is there? Do you understand why I asked you to go back and do it?
Yeah, and I think that is it's a lot easier to just say, that's probably good enough. It's not as good as I would have done it myself. But if we have them do it over and explain why, knowing that they're going to put up a fight, but in the long run, it's going to teach them a valuable lesson, and kind of go back to that earlier point you made of teaching them to do the job the right way the first time. I think it's gonna benefit them in the long run.
I think so too. You know, you had mentioned something earlier in regards to the millennials, and you know, at the end of the day, we have to realize that that generation is gonna be the next labor force and the next leaders of our country. And I employ a lot of them. I do, and I I see a lot of good. I really do. And I have a lot of conversations with people our age, Mark, with kids that are coming up, or people our age that are employing millennials right now. And you're right. You know, you had mentioned, you so I hate to say this, but at the end of the day, there's some truth in it of where the work ethic is at in that generation. And more times than not, the conversation ends up kind of coming around to a point where we talk about the fact that a work ethic and the way that this younger generation is looking at the world, it's a learned behavior. That isn't innate. It isn't something that you're just born with and you grow up and you know how to work and you know how to interact with people and you know how to take and apply yourself and you know how to ask questions if you're not sure. Those are learned behaviors, and that's the responsibility when I look at not only my own kids but the people that I employ of that generation. I look at it and I say, you know what, this is our responsibility. We need to set the expectation. We need to take in and help them understand from what we've learned that this is the way, or this is the tools that you will need that will help you succeed as you grow.
Hey, I just wanted to take a quick second here and tell you about my free parenting guide called 9 Ways to Be a Better Dad. In more than 23 years of being a parent of both boys and girls, I have learned a ton of lessons. Of course, hindsight is always 20/20, but looking back, I now know exactly what worked and what didn't. And I want to share these lessons with you. I have compiled 9 game-changing parenting tips backed by biblical truths that will help you and your kids focus on 3 critical areas of life: principled living, strong and healthy relationships, and discovering true purpose. You can download a PDF version of this free guide by visiting theinspiredlegacy.com/join. Again, that's theinspiredlegacy.com/join, or look for the link in today's show notes. Yeah, that's good stuff, man. I want to ask you, how do you wrestle personally, and then how do you kind of project this onto your kids when it comes to tying your identity with your work? You know what I mean? Because I'll just kind of put this on myself. For a lot of years, my professional career, way too much of my identity was wrapped up in my job title and what I did for a living.
Yes.
And I think that if we can steer our kids away from that mentality early on, it's going to save them a lot of heartache down the road. So have you experienced that yourself? And B, have you approached that concept with your kids at all?
Absolutely. So it's interesting that you said that you've experienced that same thing, and I don't know if that's something for men as they mature, as they grow and get a little bit older. Hopefully, you become a little bit wiser and you start to put things in perspective a little bit better. I won't speak for everyone, but I'll speak for myself. So I vividly recall when I was in my 20s, and kind of wanted to tackle the world, right? I mean, you want to, the your whole life's ahead of you, and you want to achieve certain things, and you want to climb up the ladder, and you kind of just starting to sort out what interests you, what doesn't, where do I want to go.
Typical 20 something.
Yeah, I would think so. I don't know, but I know that that's the way that I looked at things. And then vividly remember when we were expecting Hudson, our first child. Uh, there was almost like a light switch that went off. That went, wow. All right, it just got real, and I have to start supporting my family. I have to start. I really need to take and dig in and make sure that I'm supporting my family and doing what I always looked at as my responsibility as a father and as a husband. And I, I I would say that the pendulum swung way too far one direction for me, and that was exactly what you said. My identity, as much as I didn't want to take and say that it revolved around my profession, um, at the same time, I almost had this misconstrued notion that if I did better at my work, I was going to be a better husband. I was going to be a better father. And as long as I provided for my family,
Mm-hmm.
that was my job, and that's what I needed to do. And that meant that I was successful. And it it backfired. I took on more responsibility. The more responsibility I took on, the more money I made. The more money I made, the better I thought I was doing, and it came crashing down on me. I mean, hard. It nervous breakdown to the point where I didn't know which direction I was going. I didn't know how to handle it. I couldn't handle it, and I almost just needed to hit the reset button. And through all that, my wife was there. I confided in her, and she was extremely supportive. I'm very thankful for her in that regard, and she helped me kind of, well, flat out said, Matt, it doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter what your job is, doesn't matter what you make. You're a good father, you're a good husband, and that's what matters. And it did help put it in perspective. It still was difficult for me as an individual, as a man,
Mm-hmm.
to come to terms with that, and reframe the way that I that I worked, the way that I conducted myself. Um, and I would still say to this day that I have to keep that in check. Um, Maybe not so much from a father and a husband standpoint anymore, but from a personal standpoint of what is enough? What is enough? When do you consider it that you're successful, that you've done what you should do, that you've provided what you should provide? Then, of course, you get into all the other fringes um, of the wants versus the needs, and so that's kind of a tangent. But back to your point, I have felt it. I've been through it. I would say that now, at the point that I am in my life, the fact that I'm a business owner now, when I look back on how I've kind of progressed through that. And by the way, I want you to know that whole story I've told my kids, and I think that's really important,
Mm.
that I've explained to them what I've gone through and how it affected me, and the way that it affected our family, so that they can learn from that as well, and know that there's pros and cons of applying yourself to your work. That's that balance.
Yeah.
And so I've gotten to the point now where I go to work every day, Mark, and I know that I've made it a point that I apply myself to whatever I do. But at the same time, I go to work every day and I say, Lord, this is yours. If you choose today that this is the last day that I own this business, then that's your call. If If you choose that I'm going to continue doing this, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it for your glory. And if it lasts 10 years or 20 years and the boys decide that they want to take it over and it's here for them to do that, that's your call. That's not mine. And that's probably the way that I balance it now today versus the way that I looked at it before, that which was, you got to go, Matt. You got to work. You got to work. You got to work. This is up to you. It's either gonna work or it's gonna fail, and it's gonna be up to you.
Yeah, and I think, wow, you covered so much there. I think you just explained what probably 90% of married men out there have gone through, in some form or fashion, some degree. And I think that personally, I think that Satan uses that mentality to chip away at marriages and relationships.
Yep.
He likes to tell men, you're responsible for all these kids and your house and in all of your, your cars and your bills. You've got to take care of this stuff. You better stay at work a little bit later.
Yep.
And do that over and over and over years. And pretty soon you've got no marriage, you've got no relationship with your kids, or at least those things have suffered. And so we've got to just kind of keep our radar open for that wedge that Satan is trying to drive into our relationships, like I said. But, it's about finding that balance, right?
It is about, yeah, you're right. It is about finding the balance. And I think that's, I think you kind of frame that really well, that, as you're going through it, it's difficult to see it sometimes. It's difficult to see the difference between what God wants you to do, where you're supposed to be in your life, the relationships that you're supposed to have. And at least for me, I was rationalizing it. I was looking at it saying, I am doing the right thing. I am being a good husband. I am being a good father because I'm providing.
Yeah.
And
on one hand, that's correct.
Right. On one hand, it is. I guess you'd have to ask yourself, what does providing mean? What is your definition of providing? Is it providing money? Yep. If I look back on my life, yep, I was doing that. My kids have gotten older, and they've given me, again, as you get older, your kids can communicate with you a little bit differently, and they've told me numerous times, I remember seeing you on the weekends. And I was gone. I was working all the time. So was I providing everything else that they needed? Was I providing that balance? I don't think I was. And I know I wasn't, because looking back on it, the way that it affected me personally affected the way that I parented, affected my relationship with my wife. So in that regard, I wasn't providing.
Yeah, man, it's tough. I think it underscores the importance of, as you grow into adulthood and you get married and you have kids, just all along the way, you just got to pray and you got to continually listen to what God is trying to tell you to do with your life.
Exactly.
Should I go this way or should I go that way? Is this what you want me to do, or is that what you want me to do? And if we chase the wrong things, pretty soon we find ourselves in a situation that is that Satan can pretty quickly and easily work his way in there and have his way with us. So,
and for me, Mark, the one thing that I can look back at in retrospect and even look at now is the amount of peace of mind. There was an anxiety there all the time. It felt like, when you were trying to perform at your job, at your profession, and that took away from the family. It took away from your happiness, my overall happiness. And when you do exactly what you just said, which is continually pray about it and try to take and continue to put things in perspective of, where does God want me now? What does he want me to be doing right now? Am I doing it for the right reasons? Am I doing it in the right proportions? And when I reframed things to look at it that way, my happiness just exponentially grew, because now I can look at it and I say, all right, so I'm not going to go to work on a Saturday afternoon where maybe I would have before, but what am I putting in its place? I'm not putting something else other than my family in its place. I'm doing it to balance myself and put my priorities in line. God, my family, my job. Know that I'm not falling short with it, and not leaving things untied, but at the same time, not focusing all my energy in one spot, and being able to take in and I guess be a little bit more diverse and a little bit more well-rounded in that regard, to be able to take and say, yeah, I still have it under control. I still feel under control, and I know that I'm doing it for the right reasons, and I know that I'm doing it in the right way.
Well, man, this has been really good. We're 40 minutes deep about into this conversation.
It doesn't seem like 40 minutes more.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. But I know it's like I said, it's a work night and a school night, and I don't want to keep you up too late. Before I let you go, as you know, there's a question that I ask all of my guests, and we've been talking about legacy pretty much this entire conversation, or an aspect of legacy. So, when you hear the word legacy, I think a lot of people think of the traditional things that come to mind. But when you pair it with the word inspired, and you say an inspired legacy, I want to leave an inspired legacy. What does that mean to Matt Wagner?
So it is a good question. I've listened to several of your podcasts, Mark, and I've appreciated every single one of them. And all of your guests have brought a really unique insight to that question, that's made me think. And that's what I appreciate about the podcast, is that it does make me think. And when I think about what an inspired legacy means, the first thing that comes to mind is, and again, like you said, we've touched on this numerous times throughout our conversation, where I look back and the legacy that I'm continuing is the one that I receive. And I received that legacy from my father, from my mother, um, and they inspire me to this day. So to me, an inspired legacy almost kind of flips back and forth, where I'm not leaving something solely by itself, just not a legacy that I'm carrying on, because I feel inspired every single day by what I have learned. And I feel like that is my responsibility and my obligation, is to inspire others through it. And so it almost is cyclical in a way, where the legacy will continue on its own because we inspire.
I like that, man. That's a unique spin. That might be one of my favorite answers so far.
Well,
No lie.
it's the way that I've like I said, I've thought about it quite a bit, listening to your podcasts. And it to me, it's a circle. I see it in a circle, that it's not linear, where you're carrying on a legacy. It it's yeah, I guess I can't put it any other way than what I did.
Yeah. That's perfect, man. I love it. Any final parting words?
Well, I would say there's a lot to it, Mark. When it comes to work ethic, when it comes to children, when it comes to raising children, um, I think you would agree with me that there is no one right answer. There is not one right way to do it.
Yeah, that's true.
There's gosh knows that, from my experience, there's several wrong ways to do it, but I think there's several right ways to do it too. And I've done both. I've done it wrong and I've done it right. And so when it comes to raising our kids and what we try to instill in them, um, I think that it's honesty, it's integrity, it's trust, um, more than anything, the way that I've always tried to raise my kids is to relate with them. I've always tried to take and remember back to what it was when I was there. And even when I can't remember it, what it was like, because it's so different nowadays than what it was. I know that there are deep down foundations of human nature, of everyone is built exactly the same, regardless of generation to generation. And those are the things that I always try to take in and draw upon when I look at my children and how I raise them and what I do with them, is that we're all the same. We all have the same strengths. We all have the same weaknesses, the same insecurities. And if we can relate to our children in that regard, we're going to be much better and much more efficient teachers at raising them to be capable, competent, responsible adults. And that's the way that I've always tried to take and look at them.
I love it, man. Matt, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom. I appreciate you, brother.
Absolutely. You as well, Mark. I appreciate what you're doing. Keep doing it.
Well, we obviously had some connectivity issues on that call, but man, there are just so many great takeaways there. Matt, if you listen to this, thanks again for your time, man. I just took away a lot of great nuggets, everything from, making work a family affair, teaching your kids to do the small things well and doing them well the first time around. And we talked about balance a lot, and that is so key in prioritizing faith, family, and then work. Just a really valuable lesson for me. This is something that my wife and I are trying to be really intentional with our youngest child when it comes to establishing a work ethic. Again, we're raising a city boy. We don't live on a farm, and so we've got to be really creative, coming up with ways to give him responsibility and chores around the house. Something that I think does come a lot easier if you are on the farm and you've got extra, there's just more things to be done outside and more responsibilities that require your time. And so again, we're very aware that this is something that is a very slippery slope if you're not intentional about it. So again, we're trying to be intentional. That was one of the reasons I wanted to have Matt on and dive into this topic a little bit deeper, because it's very much on my radar. So if you guys took anything away from this, please share it with a friend. I know that there are other dads out there that think about this, that maybe struggle with it. So if you know anybody, share it. Get this message out there. And if you guys could take 5 minutes to leave a review on iTunes, I would be extremely grateful. As always, I've explained this before, but this podcast industry revolves around the number and the quality of ratings that we get. So the more ratings and reviews that we can receive on iTunes, the more people are going to hear about the show and the message that we have to share. If you guys are looking to keep your axe sharp by surrounding yourself with other like-minded dads, again, if you haven't already, check out our free and private Facebook group. You're going to find other guys in there like Matt who are there to help encourage and support guys who are just dealing with stuff in life. And we're going to help hold each other accountable, and we're going to help provide spiritual growth. And all of the topics that this podcast has covered, we talk about sometimes at length in that group. And so check it out if you haven't already. Guys, that's it for this episode. Again, thanks again for listening. If you got anything out of today's show, again, please subscribe, leave a review, and share our message, because when we work together, we're going to lift up fatherhood one dad at a time. Until next time, live inspired.